found one of the weaknesses in supply chain in most organizations is a real challenge of mastering and paying appropriate consideration to all of the different elements of the supply chain. Typically when you go into a company and you talk to whoever is in charge of the supply chain, it'll be someone who is very strong in purchasing and procurement and supplier management, or it'll be somebody who's very strong in logistics and freight and warehousing and distribution, or it'll be somebody who's very strong in scheduling the factory in the bowels of MRP, or hopefully Kanban, or a more demand pull approach. But it's really all three that have to come together, and you have to tie inbound and outbound freight with supplier strategies and supplier management, and with how things flow through the factory. And it's only when you can really integrate all of those things with equal consideration that you really unleash the power of lean and the power of the supply chain. Let me give you this example that quite often you'll run into companies that think there would be a lot of benefit to sourcing the things they buy closer to home, or at the very least sourcing them in their home country, in the United States in my case. That there are a lot of benefits with regard to lead times and lot sizes and so forth over buying those things in Mexico or in Asia or someplace far away, and certainly there are those benefits. And they run smack into the fact that the price per piece is higher when they bring it home, and that certainly is true. And it's awfully hard to quantify the other benefits. And the reality is that probably in your case, taking a component or a part and sourcing it in the US as opposed to sourcing it in some cheaper country isn't going to give you any benefits beyond the higher price. Because most of the costs in the supply chain, the cost of the warehousing and the cost of the supply chain organization, the cost of all the material handling tend to be pretty fixed costs. And so changing one component to a smaller lot size really isn't going to help much. Might even hurt a little bit because you got to transact it more often. On the other hand, when you can look at the whole thing, and you can look at the whole thing strategically, then you start to get into ideas like milk runs. And in a milk run scenario, I worked with a company that had sourced virtually everything within a 2 or 3 hour drive of their plant. And so rather than get weekly and monthly purchase orders, they were able to have a truck go out 3 days a week and make a little all-day long run and stop at virtually every one of their suppliers and bring back only what they needed for the next 2 days. And by running that loop continually, they were able to eliminate the warehouse, eliminate much of the scheduling, much of the purchasing and procurement. They basically were able to have blanket orders with all of those suppliers. So purchase orders that lasted a year. So all they needed to do was release a Kanban signal to them and tell them the truck's going to be there tomorrow and here's what I need you to put on it. But it's that integration of logistics, the suppliers, and how things are scheduled into the factory that allowed them to not take much out per part. In fact, they might have actually added cost per part, but able to take out huge swaths of fixed cost and free up enormous real estate within their factory. But it was that total integration approach that allowed them to do it. In another scenario, I worked with a company, a big defense contractor a few years ago, that made massive structures. These were missile launchers that went on to a lot of the Navy ships. They were doing this in the central part of the country and shipping this big structure on a flatbed trailer to the East Coast, to the big shipyards where they would be installed in the Navy ships. And in their case, they integrated outbound and inbound logistics and sourced all of the major structural components, the things that they didn't do in-house, but a lot of big parts that went into this, big composites and big steel structures and so forth, along that route from their factory to the East Coast. So they were able to send a flatbed truck out with one completed missile launcher and have that truck stop on the way back, picking up one each of all of the things it took to build another one. And so they had absolute control of inbound and outbound. They had virtually no inventory. But again, it came from, in this case, integrating inbound freight and logistics with outbound freight and logistics, with supplier locations and the types of suppliers and the factory scheduling system. But when they looked at that holistically, Again, they were able to operate with a radically lower cost structure. So I guess a couple of key points. If you want to optimize the supply chain, you need to do it strategically. You're probably not going to get there trying to improve the supply chain cost and delivery performance one part at a time. You need to look at the whole thing, or at least huge swaths of it. And the two, it only comes from considering the supplier structure and the supplier strategy, all of your logistics and freight considerations, and how you schedule the factory. And when you can integrate all of those things with equal consideration, you can come up with a pretty high performing, low cost, high velocity supply chain.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to learn more, or if we can be of any help, you can visit us at www.bill-waddell.com. Follow me on Twitter at MFG Waddell, or you can find us at Waddell.